This is part 3 of our special deep dive into the new Scott Peterson amended habeas petition filed by the LA Innocence Project. If you've already seen parts 1 and 2, you already know we're walking through Scott's own declaration, the one that he submitted in support of overturning his conviction. And it's loaded with day-by-day details of what he says really happened. In the earlier episodes, we covered the background of the case and potential game-changing information that casts serious doubt on the original conviction. So today we're just continuing to break down Scott's version of events, and we're going to get into the timeline immediately following Lacey's disappearance, the media frenzy, and his controversial behavior that so many people still question. So you're going to really want to stick with this one until the end. Okay, so we're just going to jump right in and pick up here. Now, the next section is called Medina Burglary. And Scott says, after Lacey was abducted, I learned that a burglary had occurred on our street, possibly the same day Lacey was taken, at the home of Rudy and Susan Medina, who lived right across the street from our house. I did not know about the burglary until a few days after the Medinas reported it. I recall going over there and talking with them. I do not recall hearing about a safe being stolen until after my arrest. When Stephen Todd was arrested on January 2nd, 2003 for burglarizing the Medina's house, I saw his picture in the newspaper and I recognized him as the man we had seen going through our trash, looking over our fence into our backyard, and riding his bike up and down our street. The only thing the police told me about the burglary was that it did not happen on December 24th, and the burglars were not involved in Lacey's disappearance. That was in a meeting or a phone call I had with Detective Grogan on or around January 3rd, as I recall. The police never spoke to me directly about the burglary at any other time, so I only knew what I read in the newspaper, heard from the Medinas, or what the police briefly discussed at press conferences that were held. The information I was provided is that the police received a tip, found 2 men, Stephen Todd and Glenn Pierce, who were in possession of stolen property belonging to the Medinas, made arrests on January 2nd, 2003, secured confessions from both men, and then quickly cleared both men of any involvement in Lacey's abduction because the police concluded the burglary happened 2 days after Lacey was abducted. At the time, I assumed the police were doing their jobs and had investigated and assured themselves the burglary was unrelated. Otherwise, they would not have cleared the men involved of any involvement in Lacey's abduction. I later learned that there were a number of residential burglaries taking place throughout the Longma neighborhood around the time Lacey was abducted in December 2002, but I have never seen any police reports or other information looking into any possible connections between those burglaries and Lacey's abduction. The first I learned of a possible connection between Lacey's murder and the Medina burglary was after I was arrested, when somebody on my legal team shared with me Diane Jackson's report that she had seen 3 men with a safe and a van parked in front of the Medinas on the morning of December 24th. I was pretty astounded to learn that the police improperly hypnotized the one witness who had clearly reported seeing a burglary in progress across the street from our home on the day Lacey was abducted. Now, that is something that is strange because this woman said she witnessed this, and then her testimony couldn't come into the trial because police had called her into the station to hypnotize her to see if she could remember anything else, but they were not qualified to do that. So it was automatically not usable at trial. So it kind of just voided out her statement, sadly. Now, the next section he calls the workbench. And he says, the home Lacey and I bought on Covina Avenue did not have a garage because it had been converted into a living area. So I used the warehouse where my office was located on North Emerald Avenue in West Modesto to do woodworking and home improvement projects in lieu of a garage. I had a flatbed trailer that served as a makeshift workbench, pictured below. And he's included here a photo of this, flatbed trailer that has a wooden base to it. There's a large funnel and tubing of some sort and what appears to be a plastic gasoline can at the foot of the trailer. And then there's some assorted other items that are hard to make out, but I could see a dustpan, a plastic pitcher, and some cement dust all over the right side of the trailer. And Scott writes, in September 2002, Lacey and I agreed with our neighbors who lived in the house behind us to share the cost of a new fence dividing our properties because the one that was in place was in disrepair. I agreed to do labor free of charge and split the cost of the materials with our neighbors. The project involved purchasing 10 pressure-treated wooden posts, concrete to fill 10 post holes, and 185 6-foot fence boards, as well as a few other items. The project cost summary shown below, which police found in files on my computer, shows that I estimated I would need 10 60-pound bags of concrete for the post holes at $2 a bag. I ended up buying 80-pound bags of cement instead of 60-pound bags, so I over-purchased the cement needed for the fence project and returned 3 80-pound bags of Quikrete post mix to Lowe's on November 1st, 2002. Pictured below is a receipt which was an exhibit at my trial. And he has some receipts here from these projects, which again were before November. So he wouldn't have even met Amber at this point, who he had an affair with. He continues, I used my flatbed trailer to haul the building supplies I bought for the fence building project, including bags of concrete mix. At my trial, Detective Grogan testified that a man named Doug Phelps called the tip line to say he had seen my trailer loaded with supplies in September and that he saw me driving my truck pulling a flatbed trailer loaded with 4x4 posts, fence boards, and at least 4 sacks of ready mix concrete. He was describing the supplies I had bought to build the fence. Pictured below in the circled area is the section of fence I built in September and October of 2002. I did not always keep my trailer workbench very neat and tidy. I left tools and remnants of past projects strewn about. Hauling the bags of cement on the flatbed trailer for the fence project left cement dust and residue behind on the trailer because the cement mix seeps through the packaging, as can be seen from the photos below that were taken at a Home Depot by a family friend. And he does include here photos that do show cement dust remnants that does stay after like a bag is removed. And he continues, the cement mix residue left on my trailer from hauling the bags of cement on it was part of what police saw when they searched my warehouse after Lacey was abducted. After the fence project, I attempted to build a patio table with a concrete top for Lacey that she wanted to use outside by our pool. Lacey had found a photo in a magazine and shown it to me. The table I tried to build was supposed to look something like the photo below. And there's a photo here. It looks like a small, 2 foot by 1 foot sort of patio table with a cement top. It's actually kind of cool looking. And he continues, the project involved pouring a concrete tabletop that would sit on top of a wood base. My former colleague, Eric Olson, testified at my trial that when he came to the warehouse in the middle to the end of November, he saw a, quote, partial bag of concrete that was open and partially used sitting next to the flatbed trailer. I believe that is the time frame of when I was working on the tabletop project. I built a wooden frame for a mold using 1x4s and used sheetrock screws to hold it together. To stabilize the concrete tabletop, I used some chicken wire as a metal reinforcement. I had purchased a roll of that chicken wire that was 2 feet by 25 feet to wrap around our newly planted trees, discussed in an earlier episode, I should say. So I cut off a length of about a foot from the roll of chicken wire and used it to reinforce the concrete. As I recall, the dimensions of the tabletop I was trying to build were about 12 by 18. It was intended to be an experiment, and if it worked, I was planning to make a few more like it. The images below show an example of a larger version of the kind of tabletop I was attempting to build. But instead of chicken wire, the builder in the example below is using rebar. On the right side is the roll of chicken wire I purchased. And he included a photo here of somebody building out one of these cement tables. And it does show that you need to use some kind of a metal framing like chicken wire or rebar. He continues, my tabletop project failed because I used the wrong kind of concrete to make a polished concrete tabletop and did not know I needed to use a releasing agent in the concrete when I mixed it. So when I went to remove the concrete from the wooden frame, it stuck to the wood and there were chunks missing and the aggregate was showing through, so the concrete crumbled apart. The project ended up making a mess and I had to throw the whole thing out. Pictured below are photos the police took of my trailer workbench depicting the mess I made from the patio table project and the sheetrock screws I used to frame the mold for it. I have circled where the sheetrock screws are in red. And in the photo here, I do believe I clearly see screws that he's talking about in the cement dust, and it looks like the police did take those screws in and as evidence and labeled them. And he continues, the sheetrock screws were collected and marked as Exhibit 124 at my trial and are pictured below, but the jury never heard any testimony about the failed patio project because the police did not include any of the explanations I gave them in any of the police reports, and their interviews with me were not recorded. At my trial, the prosecution told the jury in the opening and closing statements that the concrete mess left behind on my trailer from my various building projects was evidence that I had made at least 4 or 5 anchors that I used to hold down my wife's body, end quote. And that reason they could not present them to the jury was because they were located, quote, at the bottom of the San Francisco Bay. That is false. I only made 1 anchor. I did not make multiple anchors or weights, and there was no evidence supporting the prosecution's theory that I did that. The concrete mess on my workbench was from the building projects I described above, but that evidence was not fully presented to the jury, even though I explained those things to Detective Grogan during interviews and interrogations I had with him and other detectives, which were never recorded. There were no such anchors found at the bottom of the bay, despite numerous underwater searches police conducted between January and October of 2003, and the shallow areas of the bay where I went fishing on December 24th and where I was accused of dumping my wife's body. That is because I only made 1 concrete anchor, which is the one police found in my boat. I did not make multiple anchors or weights, as the prosecution argued at my trial. Detective Grogan also had a theory that I somehow used the chicken wire pictured above to wrap my wife's body in before dumping her in the bay. That did not happen. I explained to Detective Grogan that I bought the chicken wire because I was planning to wrap it around a few trees in our backyard that were being scratched up by the cats. Lacey was steadily working on landscaping our backyard area. We saw that the cats were scratching up some of our newly planted trees, and she did not want the trees to get ruined, so I told her I would wrap some chicken wire around the tree trunks to discourage the cats from scratching them up. Detective Grogan did not believe my explanation and told me I was lying. He accused me of buying the chicken wire to wrap around Lacey's body to weigh her down in the water after she was killed. That was entirely false. Detective Grogan testified that he directed Detective Reed to go to Home Depot and Lowe's on January 3rd, 2003 to inquire about the chicken wire they sold, and both reported that they sold it in rolls of 25 and 50-foot lengths. When the police unrolled the 25-foot roll of chicken wire in my truck, it was shown to be 24 feet long, or maybe a little longer, just as I had told them it would be. As explained above, I cut off just a small piece of the chicken wire from the roll I had bought to use when I tried to make the concrete tabletop, a project that failed. I also heard Detective Grogan testify that he examined the trees in our backyard to look for scratch marks. During the search warrant executed on February 18, 2003, he saw that there were several stakes and trees and shrubs in the backyard that had scratch marks on it. And in fact, much later, when we were getting ready to leave from the search warrant, I saw one of the cats scratching on one of the trees. End quote. The photo below shows scratch marks on one of the trees taken during the February 2003 search, according to police reports. Now, it's interesting to me, again, with the chicken wire, there was a receipt on his computer somewhere else that showed that it was a 25-foot long chicken wire, and the police unraveled it and saw that only a foot was missing. Why would they still try to push this theory that the body was wrapped around chicken wire when pretty much all the chicken wire was still on the roll? I can understand the frustration in that, and it's interesting. It's one I had not heard before. Now, this next section he called the fishing boat, which is a big one. And he writes, Lacey and I had a lot of friends and liked to socialize. In November of 2002, a few weeks before Thanksgiving, we were having dinner with our friends Guy and Jody Milligey, and I recall telling them that we were thinking about getting a fishing boat. The police knew this because it was confirmed in a police report. Guy and I had talked earlier in 2002 about going in together to buy a speedboat we would use for water skiing, but that did not end up happening. I recall also talking to our friend Brian Ulrich about wanting to buy a boat sometime that fall. This conversation was also confirmed when Brian talked to the police. I grew up in Southern California and spent a lot of time fishing, boating, and hunting with my family and friends. Those were all longtime hobbies of mine. I had owned 3 other boats at different times and was ready to have another one. Lacey and I had talked about getting a boat off and on at different times. One of our first dates was on a deep-sea fishing boat with friends. Lacey caught the first fish. Lacey and I were both close to our families, and we were both family-oriented people. We spent the holidays with family every year. In 2002, we spent Thanksgiving with my family in the San Diego area. We were there with my extended family between November 27th and December 1st, 2002. My family had a baby shower for Lacey and Del Mar, while my dad and brothers and I played golf. I went to meet Lacey after the shower and carried all of the gifts we had received out to the car. In early December 2002, after returning to Modesto, Lacey and I decided to look around for a small fishing boat. We knew that Lacey's stepdad, Ron, would enjoy having a boat too. Sharon Rocha testified at my preliminary hearing that Ron would have been interested in knowing I was buying a boat because he had mentioned wanting a boat several times. And side note, Ron did testify that much of their conversations were about fishing because Ron was such an avid fisherman and Scott was interested in fishing as well. Sometime in late 2001 or early 2002, I had gone fishing at Lake Amador with Ron, who talked a lot about wishing he had a fishing boat. Ron was an avid fisherman. He carried fishing poles with him around in his car, so he would be ready for any opportunity to fish that came along. He loved to fish, and he told us he wanted a boat but could not afford to buy one. We decided together that it would be nice to buy a small used fishing boat with an outboard motor so we could surprise Ron with it at Christmas. I liked fishing too, and had gone around the Escalon area and also in the Mammoth Lakes area with my family in August of 2002, but was not as avid of a fisherman as Ron was. Our plan was that Ron and I would share the fishing boat and both use it, and we would hopefully be able to keep it at Lacey's parents' house because they had room to store it and we did not. After I bought the boat, I planned to temporarily store it at the warehouse where my office was located. Lacey knew about it and was involved in the decision to buy the boat. Another reason for buying the boat was because we wanted to have that bonding experience with our own son, being out on the water and going fishing, and also to help foster a good relationship between our son and his grandfather, Ron. We looked around on the internet for used boats together. On Saturday afternoon, December 7th, I saw an ad on the internet for a used 14-foot game fisher boat with a 15 horsepower outboard motor and a trailer for sale for $1,500. The next morning, on Sunday, December 8th, 2002, I did some more searching on the internet for classified ads for boats, for boating regulations, for Department of Fish and Game rules and regulations. I had never fished in the bay before, and I knew the tides, currents, and winds could be strong there. So I also looked for a chart for San Francisco Bay. I also looked for boat ramps along the Pacific so I could see where other possible fishing areas were located. Lacey and I were both searching the internet together that morning, sitting right next to each other, as can be seen by our searches run on our computer. I was searching for boating and fishing information, and she was looking for clothes on eBay, as shown in the internet search word summary below. And he's included here evidence, I'm not sure if they use it at trial or not, but it is evidence that shows keyword searches from the morning of December 8th, just one day prior to the boat purchase. And it's really just about 20 minutes of boat ramp searches among some other like eBay clothing searches. He searches multiple boat ramps, starting with boat ramps Watsonville before a search for the San Francisco Bay boat ramp. And then finally, he does a search for the Suisun Bay ramp. Now, quick segue. Some of you who know the case know the thing most people believe got Scott convicted was his affair with Amber Fry. Obviously, he's such a jerk and had no regard for either Lacey's feelings or Amber's feelings, really, as he was taking advantage of them both. Well, the story goes that a woman named Shawn Sibley, who had just recently met Scott for the first time at a work conference, Shawn had been Amber's best friend for some time, and she is actually who introduced her new acquaintance, Scott Peterson, to Amber. Well, on December 6th of 2002, Shawn was at work talking about looking for jobs with other coworkers, and somebody mentioned he had met a Scott Peterson with TradeCorp from Modesto that was married. Shawn had testified she freaked when she heard this information, so she ran outside, called Scott, and confronted him by saying, "Hey, I heard you're married. What the hell is going on with that?" She said that Scott denied it, but Shawn wasn't buying it, so she warned him that if she found out he was lying, she'd kick the shit out of him. But determined to get to the truth, she dug out a business card from a guy named Eric, probably Eric Olson, that she had met at a conference, and called him, but he wouldn't tell her anything. So she took matters into her own hands. She bought this $30 online investigative kit to search marriage records by county. She started with Sacramento since Scott had told her once that he had a house there, but nothing came up. So she was about to check Modesto when Scott actually called her, but it went straight to voicemail. And she claimed it sounded like he was sobbing. And he said, "I'm sorry I lied. I had been married. It's just too painful to talk about. Please call me back." And so Shawn did call him back. But again, voicemail. She left her number. And later, Scott called her back, still crying, and this is how Shawn said the conversation went. Scott said, "Hey, I'm sorry I lied. I had been married. I lost my wife. Please just let me tell Amber myself. I'll be in town Monday. Don't tell her yet. Let me be the one to do it." And Shawn responded, "Scott, I don't care if you're divorced or widowed or whatever. I just want to know, are you married right now?" And Scott swore, "Nope, absolutely not." So Shawn said that Scott admitted he sometimes tells people he's married and sometimes tells them he's not. So Shawn agreed to give Scott until Monday, December 9th to tell Amber himself. But she warned him if he didn't, or if Amber asked her directly, she wasn't going to lie about it. So that Monday, again, would have been the date of December 9th, 2002. So one of the biggest claims of the prosecution is that somehow when Scott was given this deadline of December 9th to come clean to Amber, that's when he started to devise this plan, right? And come up with a plan to buy this secret fishing boat to dispose of his wife. So December 9th happened to be the same day that Scott did purchase this alleged secret fishing boat that they claimed no one, not even Lacey, knew about. But we're just going to hear in a short amount of time that there might be physical evidence that exists that proves that Lacey did in fact know about the boat. But anyway, Scott continues. I made an appointment to meet with the owner of the 14-foot game fisher I'd seen advertised the day before, a man named Bruce Peterson, no relation, later that day. We met and I liked the boat, but I was unable to test the outboard because it did not have an adapter to fit a hose, so it would need to be in water to test it, or else an adapter would be needed. I was hesitant about buying the boat without testing the engine, but the boat appeared to be well maintained, and Bruce kept his garage and work area clean and organized, so I went ahead and agreed to buy the boat. I looked at another boat that day, but it was not registered with the DMV, and I wanted a boat that was licensed. I decided to go with Bruce's boat because it was licensed, and I wanted a boat that was outfitted for fishing and had an outboard big enough for ocean fishing. If I were looking for a boat to use for the purpose of committing a crime, as the prosecution accused me of doing, I could have purchased a boat the same size or bigger for less money. I certainly would not have needed a fish finder or fishing seats, which would have taken up more room in the boat. Bruce Peterson and I agreed on a price of $1,400. It was a Sunday when I met with Bruce. He wanted to be paid in cash, and the banks were closed. So I told him I would return the next day with the cash to buy the boat. I remember talking about fishing in the bay with one of Lacey's relatives I had met at a family party in 2001. He told me he often fished for sturgeon out of Berkeley Marina. I knew it was sturgeon season, so later that night I did some more research on the internet and looked into fishing for sturgeon in the bay. Below is some of the information I printed out, and pictured below is a summary of the internet searches I did on Sunday night, December 8th. And here we see from the case file, it shows like he conducted the following searches on the night of December 8th after researching some of the boat ramps of different bays earlier that morning. At 9:46 p.m., he searched San Francisco Bay Fishing Report. And then from about 9:51 to 10:03, he's searching map of San Francisco Bay chart. Then at 10:07, he starts digging for more specific fishing information. He's searching for sturgeon fishing tackle. And then at 10:08, again, sturgeon fishing tackle. And finally, sturgeon fishing tackle San Francisco. And Scott continues, the next day, on Monday, December 9th, 2002, I got the cash I needed and went back to Bruce Peterson's to pay him the $1,400 we agreed upon for the boat and trailer, and then hauled the boat to my warehouse where I planned to store it temporarily until Christmas. Bruce included a fish finder, 2 rod holders, 2 oars, and 2 life jackets. He also included a cover for the boat in the transaction, but no straps for securing it to the boat. I did not put the boat cover on the boat when I hauled it from Bruce's to my warehouse. In fact, I never used the boat cover at all. At my trial, the jury was told that I had purchased the boat secretly and had not told anyone about it, including Lacey. I heard the prosecution tell the jury in its opening statement at trial that, quote, not a single soul knew I had bought a fishing boat on December 9th, 2002, and that buying the boat was evidence that I killed my wife. That is not true. Lacey absolutely knew about and agreed on the purchase of the fishing boat. We paid cash for the boat, not because I was trying to hide the purchase from Lacey, as the prosecution argued, but because Bruce Peterson asked to be paid in cash. Once we were back in Modesto on December 20th, 2002, Lacey and I went by my office and warehouse so I could show her the boat. Lacey said she thought Ron would like the boat and take good care of it. She asked me if I had tested the motor because she knew I had previously bought an outboard without testing it and that it developed a hole in the cylinder. I think I may have dry started the motor once, briefly after buying it, but I realized she was right. I needed to test the boat in the water before giving it as a gift to Ron for that very reason. While we were at the warehouse on December 20th, 2002, Lacey needed to use the restroom, but the toilet in my warehouse was located in the back and there were a lot of boxes and other materials that made it difficult to access the restroom. So Lacey went to a neighboring warehouse that was leased by Peggy O'Donnell and asked to use her restroom. While I did tell police that Lacey knew about the boat, I do not recall if I told them about Lacey's trip to the warehouse. When Detectives Broccini and Grogan learned from Peggy O'Donnell that Lacey visited the warehouse after we had bought the boat, they removed that information from their police reports. Detective Broccini testified that he knew Lacey had been to the warehouse and seen the boat, but that he excised that information from his report. The prosecution had evidence that Lacey knew about the boat, but continued to argue falsely to the jury that Lacey was unaware of the boat purchase because I was keeping it from her. I believe I told Detective Grogan that the boat was going to be a surprise for Ron Gransky at Christmas, but I have not seen that documented in any of his reports. I am certain I told Sharon Rocha when she asked me about the boat after Lacey was abducted that it was a surprise for Ron. This next section is called The Anchor, and Scott writes, sometime after we returned to Modesto from our trip to Carmel, I think it was probably December 19th or 20th, I decided to make an anchor for the fishing boat because Bruce Peterson did not sell me an anchor when we bought the boat. Bruce testified that after he had used 2 anchors with the boat, one that was 10 pounds and another that was 15 pounds, and that he wanted to keep both of them. I had looked around at how much new anchors cost and decided I could make one for much cheaper. Notes the police took from our home on December 26th show that I was not hiding from Lacey either the fact of the boat purchase or the fact that I was looking to buy an anchor on the boat. The notes are not in my handwriting and look to me like Lacey's handwriting, confirming that she did know I was looking to get an anchor and was taking notes of it. Pictured below are 2 handwritten notes that were collected and labeled in police reports as evidence item 55. The notes were taken on a notepad we kept near our phone and show that C&C Marine and Bob's Marine were contacted and prices were written next to each business name. Now, to me, when I heard this last year, this was like a huge development for me personally. I had learned it last year from the LA Innocence Projects motion that was filed. The fact that these Post-its existed, I thought was huge. And one thing I noticed about Scott's handwriting is he always crosses his 7s. I think it was some document where he was keeping track of something at work or something like that. And then you look at this Post-it and I think there's 2 7s that are not crossed. How many times did police and the prosecution claim that this was a secret boat that Lacey didn't know about and it was kept from Lacey? Besides these Post-it notes, we do know that another warehouse employee for a different business told police that Lacey had used her bathroom just a few days prior to her disappearance, and that was taken out of the police report. Strangely, that lines up with what Scott is saying. He told the police the truth, that Lacey was there, and then they tried to hide it. Scott continues, quote, police reports I have reviewed show that on December 30th, 2002, Detective Phil Owen called Bob's Marine and learned that a 20-pound anchor would cost me about $58. I explained that to Detective Grogan and told him I was looking to obtain an anchor and was not hiding the new boat from Lacey, as the prosecution accused me of doing. The police knew about these notes, looked into them, and confirmed that I was telling the truth about why I decided to make my own anchor for the boat, i.e., because it was cheaper than buying one. I had seen concrete anchors in the past in boats my family had rented at Lake Poway when I was a kid growing up in San Diego. I had also worked with concrete in the past. I knew concrete was inexpensive, and I knew I could make a concrete anchor like those I had seen for a lot less than the cost of buying one from a marine store. Pictured below is an example of a rental fishing boat with a concrete anchor that was shown at my trial. I told Detective Grogan I used a small paint bucket as a mold and poured an anchor that was roughly 8 pounds using a piece of heavy gauze rebar to tie the anchor to the rope or chain. The anchor I made is pictured below. When the police searched my warehouse on December 26, 2002, they found a picture I had used to work on other building projects. I explained to the police that I had used a paint bucket as a mold to make the anchor, not the picture. They once again did not believe me. The police conducted an experiment in an effort to show I was lying. The photos below show the experiment the police conducted using the picture they found and the anchor itself. Detective Broccini testified at my trial that he found a picture in my warehouse that he believed I had used to make multiple anchors. That was later proven to be false. A prosecution expert later concluded that Detective Broccini's opinion and conjecture were wrong. The picture he found was not what I used to make the anchor found in my boat. Once again, I told the police the truth, and they refused to believe me. Detective Grogan testified that for an entire year, the police were operating under the theory that I had lied about how I made the anchor. Not until a year later, after the prosecution paid a concrete expert $15,000 to analyze the picture and another concrete-related issues, did they recognize that I had told the truth about using a painter's bucket as a mold and not the picture. Mr. O'Neill, the prosecution's expert, testified the picture was the wrong size and the anchor was consistent with the 2.5 quart size painter's bucket that bore a dimple indentation on the bottom that matched the dimple present on the bottom of the painter's bucket I used, exactly as I had told the police. The prosecution also told the jury that the concrete mess on the trailer was evidence I had made multiple anchors to cover up a crime. The prosecution used evidence they claimed showed circular voids in the concrete dust on the trailer as evidence that I had made a total of 5 weights in addition to the anchor. It looks like there may be one circle on the trailer where I made the single anchor, but there were never any photos taken with tape measures or scales showing the size or dimensions of these purported circular voids. That is because I only made one anchor. One of the photos the prosecution relied on as evidence that purportedly I made multiple anchors is below. After being interviewed by the police at length about my activities on December 24th, I knew the police were questioning my movements and the answers I was giving them. The next day, December 25th, I went to my office and warehouse to pick up more tape to hang missing person flyers. If I had killed my wife using concrete anchors, I could have cleaned up that supposed evidence of concrete mess left on the flatbed trailer when I went there that day to get the tape. I did not clean anything up because I had nothing to hide. I will be the first person to admit that I did not keep this workplace tidy, but there was no evidence of multiple anchors being made. The prosecution argued to the jury in closing, quote, "You cannot tell me that someone makes, number one, this much mess on the trailer to make one 8-pound anchor. You cannot tell me that. That did not happen, especially if you put this thing in one paint bucket, right? How do you get concrete everywhere?" End quote. The police knew why there was a concrete mess on the trailer because I had told them about the other projects. They just did not believe me and failed to record those explanations in the police reports they wrote. The explanation Detective Grogan gave for not recording police interviews was that the recording devices were either not available or were broken or out of battery or were not turned on. The jury heard from the prosecution over and over in the opening statement that I told Detective Grogan I bought a 90-pound bag of concrete to make an 8-pound anchor. That was false. Detective Grogan testified under oath that in a January 3rd, 2003 interview, which was videotaped but not audio recorded, that he asked me, quote, if it was a 60-pound or 90-pound bag, how big it is, and I think the only answer I got out of him was it was something like gesturing with his hand, so I don't think he said whether it was 60 or 90 necessarily. That is completely false. I explained to Detective Grogan that I recalled making the anchor from concrete mix I had already had on hand, which I probably purchased at Home Depot or Lowe's. I also told him that after I made the anchor, I took home whatever was left in the bag of concrete mix and put it into the muddy area where we kept our garbage cans because I thought the concrete would cut down on the mud that was getting on the wheels of the trash cans. The photos below show the areas where I poured the concrete mix onto the muddy areas. And there's a photo here that clearly shows that appears to be broken up concrete or cement in the driveway area. Scott continues, concrete samples from those areas were collected and compared to the concrete from the trailer, the warehouse floor, and other areas, and it was shown at my trial that I had told the truth, and that all of these samples were the same consistency as the concrete found in the anchor, because the concrete mix is essentially all similar. The only thing different is the aggregate. Even though there was no evidence at trial showing that I ever purchased a 90-pound or 60-pound bag of concrete to make an 8-pound anchor, prosecution falsely argued to the jury in closing that I had used a 60 or 90-pound bag of concrete to make the anchor, so there was a lot of missing cement that I could not account for, and therefore it was proof I used the cement to make additional anchors to weigh down Lacey's body in the water. This is false. Okay, this is where we are going to stop for today because that was a lot. In part 4, we're going to continue reading Scott's declaration and take a step back to look at what all of this means in the big picture. Could this information, coupled with the recent filing, actually lead to a retrial? Or is it too little too late? Let me know what you all think in the comments section down below. If you have gotten any use out of this video, please take a second to subscribe so we don't lose each other. It costs nothing. It would mean so much to me to have your support along the way. As always, thank you so much for watching. Be careful out there.